Welcome to sleeping, medieval style. Throw your phone in the moat. Forget quiet, forget private, and definitely forget clean. Imagine the loudest, busiest, smelliest street festival you've ever been to. Now multiply the people by 10, take away any safety regulations, add a lot more farm animals, and dump a bucket of raw sewage in the gutter for good measure. That's getting closer. This was a world without headphones, without Netflix, without that little off switch. Fun wasn't something you consumed by yourself in a quiet room. Fun was something that happened to you out in the open, with everyone in your town. It was loud, it was physical, it was often kinda gross, and it was almost always shared. Life back then was no joke. It was hard, short, and you were constantly being reminded that you were probably going to die soon and should be thinking about God. So when people had a chance to have fun, they didn't mess around. They went for it, full throttle, with a kind of wild, desperate joy that might seem strange to us now. Their fun was a pressure valve, a way to scream, laugh, and forget for a little while. And because everyone was in on it together, your neighbors, your family, the weird guy who sold chickens, it created a crazy, powerful sense of community. You weren't just watching something funny, you were in the funny thing, shoulder to shoulder with people you'd known your whole life. So tonight, we're not going to talk about wars, or kings, or plagues. We're going on a tour of the medieval playground. We're going to peek into the taverns, crowd into the squares, and gawk at the tournaments. We'll see the games they played, the shows they watched, and the downright bizarre things they did to pass the time and feel alive. It's going to get weird. It's going to get loud, and it might get a little stinky. But it's also going to be kind of wonderful, because underneath all the strange chaos, we'll see people just like us, trying to grab a little joy wherever they could find it. So, settle in. Let the sounds of today fade away. We're heading to the town square. The bells are ringing, the crowd is gathering, and something very strange is about to begin. Okay, first stop. Let's follow the noise. And the smell. The biggest, rowdiest crowd in town isn't at the church. It's down by the river in a rough, circular pit called the Bear Garden. The air is thick with the smell of dirt, sweat, cheap beer, and, well, bear. This is the headline act. This is the medieval equivalent of the big game, the blockbuster movie, and the rock concert all rolled into one. It's bear baiting. Here's the scene. In the middle of the pit, there's a massive, confused, and very grumpy brown bear. He's chained to a post by one leg. He's been poked and prodded all morning to make sure he's in a bad mood. He is. Now, they let in the dogs. Not just any dogs. Huge, muscular mastiffs, bred for this one job. They bark and snarl, leaping at the bear, trying to grab a mouthful of fur and flesh. The bear roars a deep, terrifying sound that you feel in your chest and swings a paw the size of a dinner plate. If it connects, a dog goes flying through the air like a furry sack of potatoes. The crowd goes, ooh! They're not just watching, they're invested. People are screaming, jumping up and down. They've bet money on this. A few pennies on how many dogs it will take, or how long the bear will last. Men are yelling advice to the dog handlers. Women are covering their eyes, then peeking through their fingers. Kids are sitting on their dad's shoulders, wide-eyed. To us, it seems unbelievably cruel, and it was. But to them, it was thrilling theater. It was a dramatic story playing out right in front of them. The bear was a symbol of wild, untamed nature. The dogs were courage and human ingenuity. Watching the struggle was like watching a live-action myth. And this wasn't the only show in town. If you wanted something smaller, you could find a cockfight in any back alley. Two roosters with metal spikes tied to their feet, pecking and slashing at each other in a frenzy of feathers and blood. People gathered around, placing bets, cheering on their favorite bird. It was cheap, it was quick, and it was everywhere. For the really fancy people, the nobility, the fun was just as weird but more exclusive. Kings and lords liked to have private menageries. Think of them as really depressing early zoos. They'd collect lions, leopards, even an elephant if they could get one. These animals were living trophies, proof of their power and wealth. Sometimes they'd throw a beastly banquet. Picture this. You're a rich duke having a fancy dinner. The main course is brought in. It's a roasted peacock, but they've redressed it in its own skin and feathers, so it looks alive and gorgeous on your plate. Or maybe they serve a pie that's been baked shut. The server cuts it open, and live birds fly out, flapping around the dining hall. It was dinner and a show meant to shock and delight your guests. It was all about spectacle, about seeing something powerful, something exotic, something wild. It was a way to feel excitement in a world that could be pretty boring and hard most of the time. The noise of the crowd, the thrill of the gamble, the raw, unfiltered drama of life and death. That was a big part of medieval fun. And as the sun starts to set on the bear garden, the crowd slowly drifts away, buzzing about the big fight. The bear, if it survived, gets a bucket of scraps and a rest until next week. The people head home, their ears ringing, their voices hoarse from yelling. They've had their thrill. They've felt the buzz of the crowd. But for some, the night is just getting started, because around the corner, the tavern door is swinging open, and the smell of warm ale is calling. So, our medieval friend stumbles out of the tavern, maybe a little wobbly from the ale. The betting was fun, but that was yesterday's news. Today, the whole town is buzzing about something bigger. The roads are packed with people streaming out of the city gates. Farmers have left their fields. Shopkeepers have closed up. Everyone's heading to the big empty field just outside the walls. Why? Because today, the knights are playing, and their game is war. Well, pretend war. Sort of. It's called a tournament. Forget everything you've seen in movies with two knights neatly charging at each other. That's the joust, and we'll get to it. But the main event, the original tournament, was something else entirely. It was called the melee. Picture this. A huge open area of countryside, maybe with a stream and a little forest. Now, put two teams of armored knights in it, 50 on one side, 50 on the other. Give them swords, maces, and clubs. Then shout go. What follows is not a sport. It's a controlled riot, a massive, metallic brawl. Sound. The crowd murmur erupts into a huge, chaotic row. The clanging of metal on metal becomes intense swords clashing, the dull thud of a mace hitting a shield, the crash of a falling man in armor. Horses charge and crash into each other. Knights are grabbed and pulled from their saddles to wrestle in the mud. They're not trying to kill each other. Usually, the goal is to capture your opponent and take his horse and armor for ransom. It's basically a very violent, very expensive game of tag, where the prize is the other guy's super expensive gear. Men get crushed, bones break, concussions are Tuesday, people die. The church hated tournaments and kept banning them. which is basically the medieval equivalent of your mom saying you, LL, put your eye out. The knights just nodded, waited for her to look away, and went right back to clobbering each other. It was too much fun, and there was too much money and fame to be won. Now, within this week-long party of violence, you'd have the joust. This is the one-on-one duel we know. Two knights in incredible, shiny armor charging at each other on horseback with long lances. But even this was designed for drama. The lances were often hollow, so they'd explode into a satisfying cloud of splinters on impact. Crash, cheers. The crowd goes wild. The point was to break your lance on the other guy's shield or helmet, or better yet, knock him clean off his horse. It proved your strength, skill, and kept the armorers in business. The most extra version of all was the Padi Arms, or Passage of Arms. This was where a knight would get deeply into the romance stories everyone was reading. Hidi pick athim light, defending a magical bridge, or guarding a beautiful lady. Escardan challenge anyone who came by to a joust. He'd set up fancy pavilions, wear themed costumes, and the whole thing became live-action fantasy roleplay. It was theater, ego, and combat, all mixed together, and the crowd, they loved it. This was their Super Bowl, their red carpet award show, and their soap opera, all at once. They'd cheer for local favorites. They'd gasp at amazing hits. They'd gossip about which knight was wearing whose favor a scarf or ribbon from a noblewoman, which was a big deal. And of course, they'd bet on everything. Who would win the melee? Who would unhorse the most men? The air was full of shouted wagers. It was also the biggest social scene of the year. For the noble ladies and gentlemen watching from fancy stands, it was a chance to see and be seen, to arrange marriages, and to show off their latest fashions. For the common folk, it was a holiday, a spectacle, and a chance to maybe, just maybe, see a lord get humiliated by falling face first into a puddle. But underneath all the glitter and glory, it was a brutal, risky business. Knights went into massive debt for their armor and horses. Tourney mercenaries roamed, fighting for whoever paid them. Fights over ransom money could turn ugly. The fun was real, but so was the danger. As the sun sets on the tournament field, the knights limp back to their tents, bruised and battered but buzzing with the day's glory. The crowd trudges back to town, reliving the best crashes and the funniest falls. The field is left littered with broken lances, lost pieces of armor, and hoofprints in the mud. And tomorrow, well, tomorrow the fun takes a strange turn, because it's a holy day, and in medieval times, that didn't mean being quiet. It meant the party was moving into the church. So, it's a holy day, a feast day, time to be solemn, quiet, and pious. Right, wrong. In medieval times, religion was the heartbeat of life. It was everywhere, in everything. So of course, it was also at the absolute center of having a good time. But their idea of religious fun might just bend your brain a little. Let's start with the big one. Mystery plays. Imagine your whole town turning into a massive, open-air theater for 3 days straight. The subject, the entire history of the world, from the Garden of Eden to the Last Judgment. And the producers, not Hollywood studios, but the town guilds, the unions, for every trade. The Butchers' Guild would be in charge of the story of the sacrifice of Isaac because, you know, they had the knives. The shipwrights would build the ark for Noah's flood. The bakers might handle the Last Supper. They'd build huge, rolling stages called pageant wagons that moved from one part of town to the next. You'd stand in the square and watch the story of creation roll up to you, acted out by the guy who usually sold you nails. And here's where it gets fun. These plays weren't dry history lessons. They were full of special effects. Hell's Mouth was a favorite giant. Smoking dragon head actors could disappear into, and they were packed with comedy. Need a crowd favorite? Enter Noah's wife. In the Bible, she just gets on the ark. In the plays, she's a total nag. She argues with Noah. She refuses to get on the stupid boat. She might even slap him. The crowd would howl with laughter. It was relatable, silly, and human. Or take the shepherds in the Christmas play. While waiting for the angel's big news, they'd sit around complaining about the weather, stealing sheep, and telling fart jokes. Seriously, flatulent devils were also a big hit. The sacred and the silly sat right next to each other, and nobody batted an eye. But if the mystery plays were official, approved fun, there was another tradition that was all about flipping the world upside down. It was called the Feast of Fools. This usually happened around New Year's. For a day, the lowest level clergy, the young deacons and choir boys, got to take over the church. They'd elect a boy bishop or a lord of They'd wear the priest's robes. Inside out, they'd hold the prayer books upside down. They'd chant hymns that replaced holy words with donkey noises. They might even ride a donkey into the sanctuary. It was chaos. Blessed, sanctioned, glorious chaos. The people in charge were being mocked, right in their own house, and they were expected to take it. It was a pressure valve built right into the calendar. For one day, the strict rules of society were not just relaxed. They were paraded around and laughed at. This idea of misrule wasn't just in the church. In great manor houses, they might appoint a lord of misrule. For the 12 days of Christmas, a commoner or a servant would be king for a day. The real lord would serve him at the feast. Masters would wait on servants. Normal behavior was turned on its head so everyone could blow off steam and then return to the normal order, maybe feeling a little better about it. Think of it like a safety switch. A society with such rigid rules needed a way to laugh at those rules in a controlled way so people didn't explode. It was a social contract. Yes, I'm in charge 364 days a year, but on this day, you can make fun of me and I'll laugh too. Then, tomorrow, we go back to normal. So you'd have these two streams of fun flowing from the same source. The grand, community-wide spectacle of the mystery plays that made religion feel alive and familiar. And the raucous, rebellious parody of the Feast of Fools that let everyone poke fun at the very power structures that defined their lives. As the last pageant wagon rolled away and the final, off-key hymn of the fools mass faded, the crowd would be left tired, happy, and spiritually refreshed in a way we might not fully understand. Their faith could handle the laughter. In fact, it demanded it. But all this public spectacle could wear a person out. Maybe you didn't want to be in a crowd of thousands. Maybe you just wanted to sit down, have a drink with a few friends, and try your luck at a simpler game. Luckily, there was a perfect, smoky, noisy place for that. Just follow the smell of spilled ale and the sound of a dice cup rattling on rough wood. All right, step inside. And mind your head. The doorway is low, and the air is thick. It smells of wood smoke, damp wool, roasting meat, and the sweet, earthy scent of fermented grain. This is the tavern, the alehouse. For most ordinary people, this isn't just where you have fun. It's the living room, the news station, the office, and the casino, all rolled into one. First, let's talk about the fuel, the ale. This wasn't like a light beer you sip on a patio. This was food. It was nutritious, calorie-dense, and often safer to drink than the water. But it was also strong. It could be sweet or sour, thick, almost like soup, and it packed a punch. You didn't have a few pints. You had a few jugs, and you settled in for the night. The goal wasn't just to get a buzz, it was to get warm, full, and merry from the inside out. With a jug of the good stuff in front of you, what did you do? You played games. Forget fancy equipment. The games were as simple and solid as the wooden tables they were played on. Take shove hat. You'd take a worn, smooth board with lines scored into it and an old, worn-out coin. The goal: to use the heel of your palm to shove the coin so it landed exactly between the lines. It required a flick of the wrist, a gentle touch. SHHHK tink. Men would lean over the board, eyes narrowed in total silence, then erupt as the coin slid to a perfect stop. It was hypnotic to watch. Then there was 9 men's Maurice. You've probably seen the board scratched into 1,000 old tables, cloister seats, and stone steps. It's a simple grid. Each player has 9 pieces, or men, and you try to line 3 of them up in a row to mill your opponent and remove one of his pieces. It's a mix of luck and strategy. Simple to learn, but deadly serious to play. You'd see 2 grizzled farmers hunched over it for hours, moving their wooden pegs with solemn concentration, only speaking to grunt, your mill. But if you wanted real excitement, you went for hazard. This was the pure, screaming chaos of chance. It's the ancestor of craps. You have a pair of dice and a mad set of rules about main points and chances. Someone would be the caster, shouting the bets. The dice would rattle in a leather cup and fly across the table. Sound: the dramatic, rapid shaking of dice in a cup. A pause, then the scatter of them on wood. 7. Someone would yell. Money would slam down on the wet table. I'll cover it. Groans, cheers, curses. It was fast, loud, and a fantastic way to lose your week's wages in about 2 minutes. The church hated it, which of course made everyone love it even more. But a tavern wasn't just about games. It was the internet of its day. This is where news traveled, where stories were told. If you were lucky, a traveling minstrel might come through. He'd pull out a lute or a small harp, and he wouldn't sing gentle love songs. He'd sing the epic, bloody, and hilarious ballads that were the blockbuster movies of the time. Tales of Robin Hood, stealing from the rich. Raunchy stories of clever peasants outwitting greedy priests. Love stories that always ended in tragedy. People would lean in, mouths slightly open, following every word. They'd join in on the choruses, pounding their mugs on the table in time. It was a live show, and the payment was a free meal and a place to sleep. And, of course, there was the social stuff, the flirting. A young man might buy a penny pot of ale. For a young woman, they'd play a game of kiss and daring. If space allowed, the tavern was one of the few places where young people could meet outside the watchful eyes of their families, under the slightly less watchful, but very judgmental, eyes of the whole village. And the fighting, let's be honest, put that many tired, stressed, drunk people in a small, dark room, and someone's going to get shoved. A disagreement over a dice roll, a spilled drink, a sideways glance, it could all end with a fistfight. Benches would topple. Mugs would fly. It was part of the package. Often, it was over as quickly as it started, with the combatants buying each other a drink 5 minutes later. Other times, the alewife who ran the place would whack them both with her stirring paddle and throw them out into the street. Ah, the alewife. She's the star of this whole scene. Often a widow, she was a formidable businesswoman. She brewed the ale in the back Everyone knew whose brew was the strongest. She kept order. She lent money. She knew everyone's secrets. She was respected, needed, and often a bit feared. She was the queen of this cozy, chaotic, underground kingdom of fun. As the night wore on, the fire would burn low. The games would wind down. The storytellers would grow hoarse. People would stumble out into the cold, dark street, wrapped in a warm haze of ale and companionship, ready to face another hard week of work. But not all fun was inside four walls. For the really big, community-wide, levior dignitate kind of fun, you had to wait for a holiday. And then, the whole village would explode into movement, in a tradition that was less a sport and more a joyful, violent riot. So, you've slept off the ale. It's a holiday Monday, maybe a saint's day, and work is forbidden. What does an entire village of restless, bored people do? They invent games, and the number one rule of medieval village games seems to have been, there are no rules. Or if there are, they exist only to be broken. Let's start with the granddaddy of them all. Mob football. Forget everything you know about soccer or American football. This is the original. The only equipment, a pig's bladder, inflated and maybe encased in leather. The ball, the teams, the entire able-bodied population of two rival villages, or the unmarried men against the married men of the same town. The goals, sometimes just the opposite town, as church door or a marked tree in each village. The distance. Oh, just a mile or three, through fields, across streams, through people's vegetable gardens, and straight down the main street. There was no limit to the number of players. No passing, no off, just a seething, shouting, laughing, fighting river of humanity, chasing a bouncing bladder. You could pick up the ball and run with it. You could trip, tackle, or just sit on anyone from the other side. The only common rule was that murder and manslaughter were frowned upon. Mostly sound. The roar becomes overwhelming, hundreds of voices yelling, a shrill whistle, the splosh of people wading through a stream, the crash of a fence breaking, and a woman leaning out a window and shouting, "Not my cabbages." It was glorious, anarchic chaos. It settled old scores. It blew off a year's worth of steam. People got trampled, muddy, and bruised, and they loved every minute of it. It wasn't about winning neatly. It was about the shared, primal struggle of your side against theirs. When everyone finally collapsed, exhausted and filthy, the ball forgotten in some ditch, they'd all limp to the tavern together, rivals clapping each other on sore backs. The fun was in the fight, not the finish line. But maybe you wanted something with a slightly smaller chance of being drowned in a ditch? The local fair offered other, more specialized, and brilliantly weird competitions. Ever heard of shin? It was exactly what it sounds like. Two men would hold each other by the shoulders and then take turns kicking each other in the shins until one collapsed in agony. They'd sometimes stuff their trousers with straw for padding. But it was basically a contest of who could tolerate the most pain. A crowd would circle them, counting the kicks, cheering on the masochists. There was also backsorting, another elegant pastime. Two men, each with one arm tied behind their back, would take turns whacking each other over the head with a stout stick. First, to draw blood from the scalp, one. It was quick, brutal, and a great way to settle an argument. Then you had the truly surreal traditions, many of which still survive in weird little English villages today, like cheese rolling. The concept is simple. Take a round, hard cheese, send it rolling down a very steep, grassy hill, then send dozens of people racing and tumbling after it. The first person to the bottom wins. The cheese, which is now probably a pulverized mess. Why? No one knows. But it was a riot. Or pair up, stand apart, toss a fresh egg back and forth. After each successful catch, both of you take a step back. The distance grows. The tension mounts. Splat. The loser is covered in yolk. The crowd howls. These weren't just silly games. They were often tied to the ancient, pagan rhythm of the year, dressed up in Christian clothes. The wild abandon of the mob football at Shrovetide was a last blast before the sobriety of Lent. The May Day celebrations were all about fertility dancing around the maypole, a very obvious symbol, crowning a May Queen, and staying out all night in the woods. The church scowled, but the people kept dancing. Even funerals were a party. The village wake after a burial wasn't a quiet affair. It was a like wake or ale. The community gathered to eat, drink, and play games right there by the graveside. It was a way to celebrate the life lost, to reaffirm that the community of the living was still strong, and to, well, have a bit of fun because death was always around the corner anyway. You'd have wrestling matches, foot races, and yes, more drinking. Grief and joy sat side. This was fun at its most fundamental, physical, communal, often tied to the land and the seasons. It was messy, exhausting, and left you with stories and bruises that lasted 4 weeks. There was no audience. Everyone was a player. You didn't watch the fun. You were the fun. But maybe you're thinking, that's all a bit too sweaty. What did the fancy people do? The lords and ladies in their castles, they wouldn't be caught dead kicking a shin or chasing a cheese. You're right. They had their own strange ways to pass the time indoors, where the biggest risk wasn't a broken bone, but maybe a bruised ego or a scandalous kiss. Welcome to the other side of fun. We've left the mud, the blood, and the screaming crowds behind. Here, in the Lord's Great Hall, the air is scented with rushes on the floor, which sometimes hid less pleasant smells. Let's be honest, and the smoke from expensive candles. The nobility didn't do mob football. They'd ruin their clothes. Their fun was about skill, wit, and most importantly, social maneuvering. A game here was never just a game. It was a way to show off your intelligence, your grace, and maybe find a husband or wife. But that doesn't mean it wasn't strange. Let's start with a classic parlor game, Hot Cockles. Here's how it worked. One person, the victim, would kneel down and put their head in someone's lap. Blindfolded, they'd put one hand behind their back, palm up. Then, the other players would take turns sneaking up and giving their palm a good, sharp smack. The blindfolded person then had to guess who had spanked them. Sound. A moment of anticipatory silence. Then, a crisp smack of hand on hand, followed by polite, muffled giggles. "My Lord John," the victim would guess. Incorrect. The crowd would chirp. It was Lady Eleanor. More laughter. The game would continue until they got it right, by which point their hand was probably bright red. It was silly, slightly painful, and broke down physical boundaries in a safe, rule-bound way. Imagine playing this at a modern dinner party. It would be a lawsuit. Speaking of breaking down boundaries, this was the real purpose of a lot of noble fun. Courting in a world where marriages were business deals. These games and gatherings were the only window for any kind of personal connection. They'd play post and pillar. In this game, young men and women stood in alternating spots in a circle, like a maypole. When the music stopped, you had to find a new partner. It was a musical chairs for flirtation, a chance to touch a hand or share a secret whisper in the chaos, or kiss in the ring, a forerunner to spin the bottle. Players sat in a circle, and one person walked around the outside with a handkerchief. They'd drop it behind someone, and then had to run around the circle to claim a kiss from that person before they were tagged. It was sanctioned, playful romance. But not all fun was about pairing off. There were games of pure intellectual wondermanship. Chess was huge. It was the game of kings and nobles for a reason. It was slow, strategic, and proved you had a clever, patient mind. It was also a fantastic way to sit very close to someone for hours without causing gossip. Then there was dice. Yes, the nobles gambled too, but they often did it on beautifully carved chessboards, using expensive ivory dice. They'd bet huge sums of money on a single roll, trying to appear casually extravagant. It was a way to show off wealth without seeming to care about it. When they weren't gaming, they were being entertained. Music was everywhere, but not like the raucous tavern ballads. Here, a skilled musician might play the lute or the harp, and a trained singer would perform complex, melancholy songs about unrequited love. It was beautiful, and a perfect background for sighing dramatically. Dancing was not just dancing, it was a language. The formal, intricate steps of dances like the estampi or the carol were a way to show off your grace, your wealth, in the form of your clothing, which had to allow for the movements and your discipline. A misstep wasn't just awkward, it was a social failure. And then there was the bedtime story for adults, the reading aloud of romances. Imagine the scene. The fire is crackling. The day's games are done. Everyone is gathered around as a clerk or a literate lady reads from a beautifully illustrated manuscript. The story is always something like Tristan and Iseult or Lancelot and Guinevere. These stories were the medieval soap opera, full of forbidden love, secret passions, dramatic betrayals, and magical potions. The ladies might sigh for the tragic heroes. The men might nod at the acts of knightly valor, and everyone was listening to tales of passionate, rule-breaking love, while sitting in a room where their own marriages had been coldly arranged for land and power. The irony was thick and delicious. So, the nobles' fun was a delicate dance. A game of hot cockles was a chance for controlled, playful touch. A chess match was a battle of wits and a long conversation. A dance was a public performance of your worth. It was all fun, yes, but it was fun with a job to do, to reinforce social bonds, display status, and navigate the complicated maze of finding something resembling love within a cage of duty. It was a quieter, more complicated kind of chaos than the village green, but it had its own shared glances, its own inside jokes, its own scandals whispered about the next day. And presiding over all of it in both the noble court and the peasant tavern was a unique professional, the one person whose entire job was to be strange to cross lines, and to make people laugh even at the king himself. In a world of strict rules, know your place, bow to your lord, fear your God, there was one glorious, sparkling exception. One person who could step over every line, say the unsayable, and poke the most powerful person in the room. And not only would they not be thrown in the dungeon, they'd get paid for it. Meet the fool, the jester, the professional weirdo. That jingling sound, that's him. The bells on his coxcomb, that silly, floppy, multi-pointed hat, his uniform, his suit of office, the bright, mismatched clothes called motley, and the bells were a walking advertisement. They said, "Nothing I do or say counts under the normal rules. I am a walking holiday." Don't think of him as just a clown. He was more like a therapist, a satirical news anchor, and a live-action cartoon, all in one. His job was to tell the truth, but he had to do it while juggling, or doing a backflip, or making a fart joke. He had a license to insult. He could walk up to a king who was being particularly vain or stupid and say, "Your Majesty, your new law is as useful as a leather bucket." And instead of losing his head, he might get a laugh and a gold coin. Why? Because the king needed someone to do that. Everyone else was too busy saying yes. The fool was the living, breathing check on a ruler's ego. He was the court's pressure valve, just like the Feast of Fools was for the church. His toolkit was vast. Juggling, acrobatics, music from a lute or a recorder. He'd do ridiculous impressions of visiting dignitaries. He'd tell satirical stories where everyone knew the greedy bishop in the tale was really the greedy bishop sitting right over there. He'd use puns and wordplay so clever it would make the educated courtiers groan and smile at the same time. But his most important tool was his marat, that little stick with a carved replica of his own fool's head on it. He'd hold it up as he mocked someone, as if to say, "Don't hate me, hate this little guy." He's the one saying it. It was a get-out-of-jail-free card, clutched in his hand. Sound. The fool's own voice, not the narrator's. It's higher, melodic, but with a sharp, intelligent edge. He speaks directly to us, breaking the fourth wall. But you see, dear listener, it's a fine dance, like dancing on the castle walls. 1 step to make them laugh, 2 steps to make them think, and a little pirouette, so that when they realize the joke is on them, they're laughing too hard to get angry. The bells warn them, "Caution, truth-teller at work." Sound, the jingle of bells as he presumably skips or dances. But not all funny men worked in castles. The streets had their own stars. Minstrels we've met, but also bear letters, with their dancing and very miserable bears. Puppet masters putting on scandalous little shows from a portable booth. Fayuritas and acrobats turning a crowded market corner into a circus. They were the everyday background weirdness. The content creators of the medieval street paid in pennies and scraps. Then there was the strangest character of all, the wild man. He'd be covered in shaggy green moss or ragged hair, his face blackened with soot. He'd burst into a feast or a procession, waving a club, grunting and roaring, acting the part of the untamed savage from the deepest woods. Knights would pretend to fight him. Ladies would pretend to be scared. He was a walking reminder of the chaos just outside the city walls, invited in to be tamed by the laughter of the crowd. He was the monster under the bed, hired for the party. But this life had a dark side. That license wasn't always honored by a king in a bad mood. A joke that went too far could end with a whipping instead of a reward. And for some fools, especially those born with what we now call intellectual they were kept as natural fools, pets for the amusement of the rich, their differences exploited. Their laughter wasn't always their own. For the true professional, though, it was a life of brilliant, risky freedom. He saw everything. He heard all the gossip. He knew where the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking, and he could speak truths that would get anyone else hanged, as long as he made it rhyme and did a silly walk afterwards. He was a living paradox, a necessary piece of insanity in a world obsessed with order. When the weight of ceremony, prayer, and social rank grew too heavy, the fool was there to stick out his tongue and make it all feel lighter. Just for a moment. As the castle settles into sleep, the fool might put away his marat. The bells go quiet, but tomorrow, he'll be back at it. Because in a hard world, everyone needs to laugh, and sometimes you need permission to laugh at the people in charge. Speaking of getting permission to step outside the rules, there was one activity that everyone, from the fool to the king, could get permission for. It was a sacred duty, a long journey, and for many, the biggest, most exciting party of their lives. It was time to go on a road trip. A holy road trip. Here's a strange idea for a vacation. Walk for months in uncomfortable shoes. Sleep on dirty floors. Eat questionable food. Risk being robbed. All to kneel in front of a box of old bones in a distant city. Welcome to the pilgrimage. The ultimate medieval combo platter. Part spiritual duty. Part endurance. Challenge. And the let's be honest part. Raucous, once-in-a-lifetime party. For people whose whole world was their village, the idea of going somewhere was thrilling. And the best reason you could possibly give your family, your lord, or yourself for leaving was, God told me to. So off they went. First, you'd get your kit. The uniform was unmistakable. A long, rough wool tunic, a wide-brimmed hat, a sturdy staff, a leather pouch for food, and the most important item, a scallop shell tied to your hat or cloak. That was the universal sign for I'm going to Santiago de Compostela in Spain. For Canterbury, you might get a little tin badge of Thomas Becket. These were the medieval version of souvenir t-shirts, but you earned them the hard way. Then, you'd find a group. Because walking alone was basically asking to become a wolf's lunch. So you'd band together with other pilgrims from your town. Or you'd join a motley crew on the road. And this is where the fun began. The road was the original social network. You were thrown together with people you'd never meet in normal life. A grumpy blacksmith from York, a widowed noblewoman from London, a runaway apprentice, a cheerful friar. You walked together all day. You shared your food or complained about the lack of it. You told your life story. You sang songs to make the miles go faster. Sound. The lonely walking sounds are joined by a few other sets of footsteps. A soft, communal humming begins, which turns into a simple, walking-paced song in harmony. It's not polished, it's slightly off-key and tired, but cheerful. It was like a months-long, mobile sleepover. The shared misery of blisters and rain created instant, deep friendships. And, of course, there was gossip, so much gossip. By the time you reached your destination, you knew everyone's business. At night, you'd stop at a pilgrim inn. And here, the party really kicked off. These places were notorious. The beds were packed with strangers, literally, like 6 to a mattress. The food was a lottery, and the crowd was a mix of the truly devout and total chancers. Because for every real pilgrim, there was a professional pilgrim guy who made the trip every year. Not for faith, but for the free food, the charity, and the chance to scam newcomers. He'd have the best stories, the most convincing sob stories, and he knew all the best inns to avoid or to find the best wine. Then there were the partners. These were characters who sold spiritual insurance. They'd set up shop along the route with a bag full of relics. A twig, they claimed, was from Moses' burning bush, a feather from the wing of the angel Gabriel. For a donation, they'd give you a scrap of parchment and indulgence that promised to shave time off your stay in purgatory. It was a total racket, and everyone kinda knew it. But what if it worked? Better safe than sorry. It was morbid, transactional, and a very medieval kind of fun. After weeks or months, you'd finally arrive. Canterbury, Santiago, Rome. And what did you find? A carnival. A carnival. Sound. The walking song fades, drowned out by a sudden wave of noise. It's the same chaotic market sound from Chapter 1, but mixed with chanting monks and the ringing of huge cathedral bells. The area around the holy shrine was a full-blown festival ground. Stalls sold hot food, wine, and cheap drinks. Acrobats and musicians performed. Hawkers shouted. People were celebrating they'd made it. The air was thick with relief, joy, and the smell of frying dough. You'd finally push your way into the cathedral, kneel at the shrine, say your prayers, and feel that holy glow. And then you'd go shopping. This was the best part. You'd buy your official pilgrim badge. Not just a shell now, but a finely crafted tin pin from the cathedral itself. Some showed the saint, others showed something funny that happened on the journey. There were badges shaped like legs for healing, or even body ones as inside jokes. You'd pin them proudly to your hat, a walking scrapbook of your adventure. You'd stay 4 days, meeting pilgrims from other countries, sharing stories, comparing blisters, and toasting your survival. The taverns near the shrine did the best business in Christendom. It was a holy spring break. Then it was time to go home. The walk back was different. You were a seasoned traveler now. You had souvenirs. You had wild stories about the time you outran bandits in Burgundy, or the miraculous cheese that never went moldy. You were a minor celebrity in your village. For the rest of your life, you'd be the one who went to Santiago. So was it a spiritual journey? Absolutely. Was it also the greatest adventure and social event of a common person's life? Without a doubt. It was fun woven right into the fabric of fate, the fatigue, the fear, the friendship, and the final, fabulous party at the end of the road. But not all medieval fun was about celebration and release. Some of it was tied to something darker, something the crowd gathered for, not to cheer, but to shudder. And yet, they still came. They still watched. Because sometimes, the strangest fun of all was found in the shadow of the gallows. We followed the fun through fairs, taverns, and pilgrim roads. But now we have to talk about the part that's hardest for us to understand. The fun that wasn't bright, but dark. The kind that didn't come from celebration, but from justice. Or at least, what passed for it. In medieval times, punishment was public. And the public really showed up for it. Think about it. There's no TV, no movies. The biggest, most dramatic stories are real life. And nothing was more dramatic than the moment when the universe's scales were supposedly balanced when a sinner faced their fate. Execution Day was a public holiday. Shops closed. Kids got the day off school, if they went. People packed lunches and brought the whole family. They'd arrive early to get a good spot. Vendors sold snacks, drinks, and souvenirs. That's right. You could buy a pastry shaped like a gallows or a little wooden figure of the condemned. It was gruesome, but it was also just what you did. It wasn't just about bloodlust. It was theater, a morality play with a real, final ending. The day would start with a procession. The condemned would be paraded through the streets, maybe on a cart, sometimes forced to wear a sign saying what they did. A priest would walk with them, urging them to repent, to give the crowd a good, moral ending. The crowd itself wasn't silent. They might jeer and throw rotten food at a hated criminal, or sometimes they might weep and throw flowers for someone they thought was getting a raw deal. They were part of the show. Then came the main event. And the method was the message. For a noble, it was the axe or the sword, clean, fast, and somewhat dignified. For everyone else, it was the gallows for thieves and robbers, or the stake for heretics and witches. Each was a visual sermon. The gallows showed the consequences for crimes against property. The fire purified the soul of spiritual crimes. Sound. The crowd murmur swells, then drops into a sudden, collective hush. A single, official voice drones in the distance. Unintelligible, but solemn. Then the hush holds, taut and breathless. The crowd watched every detail. The final words. The pale face. The tremble in the knees. They listened for a last confession or a final curse. They weren't just passive viewers. Their presence was required. Their witness was the punishment, being erased from the community, in front of the community. But not all public punishment was lethal. For smaller crimes, you had the stocks and the pillory. The stocks trapped your legs. The pillory trapped your head and hands. You'd be locked in for hours or days in the town square. And then, the public was invited to participate. This was the interactive part of the show. People weren't supposed to kill you, but everything else was pretty much on the table. Rotten eggs, overripe tomatoes, mud. Sometimes, if the crime was really nasty, like selling bad bread or cheating customers, people might throw stones or, well, let's just say the contents of chamber pots were not off-limit. It was humiliating, cold, and messy. It let the whole town share in the act of shaming, reinforcing the rules everyone had to live by. Then there was the chivalry or rough music. This was unofficial punishment, meted out by the neighbors. If a couple had a scandalous marriage, a huge age gap, or a wife beating her husband, the village might show up outside their house at night. They'd bang pots and pans, blow horns, and make a horrific, mocking racket until the couple paid them to go away. It was peer pressure with percussion. So why was this fun? It's the hardest question. Part of it was the same thrill that draws people to true crime podcasts or scary movies. Today, a safe brush with danger and darkness. Part was the powerful social bonding of sharing an intense, moral experience with your whole community. You all saw the bad thing happen, and you all saw justice done. It made the world feel ordered, if brutally so. It was also, simply, something to see. In a world of dull routine, the sheer drama of a life ending, or a proud person brought low, was a powerful spectacle. The laughter at the pillory was nervous, cruel, but also releasing. It was a way of saying, better him than me. The rules protect me. As the crowd dispersed after an execution quiet now, the strange holiday excitement spent, they'd go back to their lives. They'd talk about it for weeks. They'd feel the world was a little safer, a little more in balance. The fun here was dark, complex, and rooted in a worldview where justice needed to be seen to be believed. Our tour of medieval fun is almost done. We've seen the loud, the silly, the sacred, and the grim. From bear pits to pilgrim roads to the foot of the gallows, people sought connection, release, and meaning. They found it in ways that can shock us, baffle us, and sometimes, in a strange light, make us nod in recognition. Because that urge to play, to break rules, to be part of a crowd, and to stare into the dark never really went away. We just gave it new costumes. So, what happened to all of it? The bears, the jousts, the cheese rolling, the somersaulting fools? Did we just grow up and get boring? Not exactly. We just swapped the props. The stages changed, but the players are still running the same old scripts, looking for the same kind of fun our muddy, noisy, wonderful ancestors did. Let's connect the dots. That massive, violent town versus town mob football, it never really died. It just got rules, a fancy ball, and commercials. But stand in the middle of the crowd at a major soccer match, the deafening roar, the total tribal identity, the sheer physical release of screaming yourself hoarse with tens of thousands of people who feel like your family for 90 minutes. That's the direct descendant of the field between two villages. The hooligans, who sometimes take it too far. They are just the guys who never got the memo that you shouldn't actually break the other team's bones. The county fair, with its Ferris wheel and piting contests, that's the direct heir to the village wake and the summer fair. We still gather to be amazed by a giant pumpkin instead of a dancing bear, to test our skills shooting water guns instead of shooting arrows, to eat terrible, wonderful food, and to feel like part of a community. The prizes are plush toys instead of a kiss from the May Queen, but the feeling is the same. And what about our love of watching a good train wreck? The public, shaming spectacle of the pillory didn't vanish. It just went digital. A social media pylon where someone is figuratively locked in the stocks for a bad take, and the whole world is invited to throw their rotten tomatoes in the form of angry comments and memes, is the same strange blend of justice, cruelty, and communal bonding. We still get that shudder of fascination with the dark side, only now we watch true crime documentaries instead of heading to the gallows. Think about the Feast of Fools, that glorious sanctioned rebellion. We still have that. It's called Satire Night Live, or a viral parody video. It's the court jester's spirit, alive and well, using comedy to poke fun at the powerful. The Fool's license is now a writer's room or a YouTube channel. Even the pilgrimage has a modern twin. It's the destination festival or the once-in-a-lifetime trip. Think about it. You save up money. You buy the uniform branded you travel a long way, often uncomfortably, with strangers who become fast friends. You endure the lines, the bad food, the exhaustion, all to reach a sacred place, not a saint's tomb, but a concert stage, a mountain summit, or the gates of a theme park. You take 1,000,000 photos, your modern pilgrim badges, buy the overpriced souvenir, and come home with stories that define you. The journey is the fun, and those incredibly specific, bizarre village traditions like cheese rolling or bog snorkeling, they're alive and kicking. We've just added more of them. Look at any local news website and you'll find a story about the world championship of anything weird. Pumpkin, chunkin, extreme, ironing. TikTok challenges are just the latest, fastest moving version of this. A sudden, collective, often physically silly dare that sweeps through the global village. Why do we do it? For the same reason they did. To break the monotony, to connect, to say, look what our stupid, amazing human bodies can do. So what did we lose along the way? We lost a lot of the raw, shared physicality. Our fun is often more in our heads now, or through a screen. We don't all dance together in the square as often. We lost the beautiful, messy blending of the sacred and the silly though. Idea that you could laugh until you cried in the middle of a religious story. And, thankfully, we lost a lot of the cruelty to animals and to people that was baked into their entertainment. Our conscience grew, and that's a good thing. But what did we gain? Choice. Incredible, overwhelming choice. A medieval peasant had maybe a dozen forms of fun in their entire life. We have millions at our fingertips, any second of the day. Safety. Our fun is far less likely to end with a broken neck or a bout of plague. And diversity. We can find our weird little tribe of people who love the same incredibly specific, strange thing we do, no matter where they live. But the core hunger hasn't changed one bit. We still crave that communal release, We still need to laugh at authority. We still seek the thrill of a shared experience, whether it's in a stadium or a live stream chat. We still use play to flirt, to bond, to forget our troubles, and to feel vibrantly, stupidly alive. The medieval person looked at a hard world and built a bear-baiting pit, a rickety pageant wagon, and a maypole. We look at our complex world and build virtual realities, global social networks, and international sporting events. The tools are galaxies apart, but the heart beating behind it all, the same. So as you lie here, in your quiet, modern room, think about that thread. It connects you through centuries. To a farmer, laughing so hard, he cries at a flatulent devil in a mystery play. To a young woman blushing during a game of kiss-and-tharing. To the exhausted, blissful pilgrim sinking into an embed after a long day's walk. They were seeking light in their darkness, just as you might be right now. Connection in their isolation, a reason to smile. Their methods were strange, spectacular, and sometimes shocking, but their goal was beautifully, simply human. Sound. The modern park sounds have faded away. The lute melody returns, slower now, joined by a very soft, deep hum like distant monastic chant. The wind is just a whisper. Let the images drift by. The glowing lantern of a tavern window in a dark street. The colorful flapping of flags at a joust. The determined, silly tumble of bodies chasing a cheese down a hill. The solemn, shared silence of a crowd watching a story they know by heart. It's all a part of us.